Okay, on this episode, one of the things I'm going to do up front here is try to provide some clarification over, well, my previous episodes about the coronavirus, because I did receive an email from a listener from the audio version of the show, and they were a bit confused because they were saying, they were getting the impression that on the one hand, I'm saying that the Republicans were leading the effort on trying to stop the spread of the coronavirus, and it was the Democrats that were undermining all those efforts, of trying to stop it into the United States. And on the other hand, it seems like I'm trying to say that the coronavirus is not that much of a threat. Now, I'll try to explain that because one of the things about the show is I explain things in ways that make sense to me, but it doesn't always make sense to everybody else. There are times when I wish I had 2 or 3 other people here so that as I'm going through and explaining stuff, they could give me feedback as to whether or not they understand or whether or not, they're confused by what I'm saying. All right, so I'm going to get into that. But first, there is one thing I have to address. And that is, Tom Brady announces he's done with the New England Patriots. Yes, suck it, Patriots fans. I know that we are in a moment of national pandemic and crisis, but that doesn't mean I'm all of a sudden going to be nice to Patriot fans. I hope they are crying, because as it comes time for them to break in a new quarterback, their team is going to suck for a while, which means no New England Patriots in the Super Bowl for quite some time. Okay. So enough with that for right now, because we do got to get things into a serious, tone here. So when I go through and I talk about the coronavirus, and a lot of my coverage has been about how the media has been covering it, how dishonest they are, how politicized they are, and all of that. But before I get into my coronavirus coverage, I always preface my opening of that with this statement. And you can go back and watch or listen to previous episodes and you'll see this, where I say it's not that the coronavirus isn't a threat, it's about the level of threat versus the level of panic. Right? So I'm going to address both parts of that. Now, up front, when I'm saying it's not that the coronavirus isn't a threat, which is another way of saying it is a threat, right? If you go through and actually analyze that statement, it is a threat. There are a lot of threats, to us. A lot of viruses and diseases that are a threat to us. Influenza is a threat, right? And just to go through and, provide a little bit of context here, right? Let's go ahead. This is a great clip that goes through and compares the numbers.
The coronavirus is no different. So far, there have been under 200,000 confirmed cases worldwide. It's on 181,377. I have an updated number right there. Anyway, and more than 7,000 deaths. The goal is to save as many lives here in America and worldwide as possible. At home in America, 3,800 Americans have tested positive for the disease. Again, facts without fear. Less than 100 have died. Those numbers will rise, likely dramatically, with more testing, or the numbers that have contracted the disease. It is then expected, if everybody does their part, it will level off. The sooner the better. And for context, a lot of people don't seem to know this, and this is why the fear-mongering and the panic and the hype and hysteria is so unhelpful. Last year, over 35 million Americans contracted the flu. Over 490,000 Americans hospitalized for the flu. 34,000 Americans died of the flu right here in the United States over the course of just 1 year, and that's pretty typical. Now, thankfully, the toll surrounding coronavirus is lower.
Okay, so let's provide that with context. It's a virus. It is a threat. It's a threat to those who have compromised immune systems and to the elderly. And the elderly typically are people with compromised immune systems, right? Now, there are some differences between the coronavirus and the flu. And it's those differences that make the coronavirus threat a little higher than influenza. But that clip over influenza is just to provide you some context, right? Over how many people die from influenza, although we don't freak out about it. so much for several reasons. The first reason is it's seasonal. It comes every year. We expect it. We know that it is coming. It's not part of the collective consciousness because we have become used to it. All right, that is one thing. Secondly, we don't necessarily freak out about the flu because it's not an asymptomatic virus, right? Which is to say that you don't become contagious with the flu until you start feeling some symptoms. And this limits the spread of the flu. I mean, think about that. It reached to around 35 million people. And let's take a look at how people normally react with the flu. When you start becoming contagious, you already feel symptoms. You already, feel kind of blah. You don't really want to go anywhere, make any unnecessary trips. You generally may call up your employer, take some PTO days, and instead of going into work, you curl up in the bed, eat some chicken noodle soup, and you don't go anywhere unless you have to. Because you already feel bad, you naturally already self-contain yourself, right? You self-quarantine yourself just because of a lack of motivation to even get out and do anything, right? And even though we already engage in some self-quarantine and don't really go anywhere due to a lack of motivation, it still spreads throughout 35 million people. 400 and some thousand people are hospitalized, and 8 to 40,000 people die. And that's with us naturally self-quarantining ourselves because we don't feel well, right? The reason for, what's going on with, shutting down businesses, international travels, self-quarantine, social distancing is because with the coronavirus, you are already contagious before you feel any symptoms, right? So as I was saying with the influenza, you are unmotivated to go anywhere. You don't really go out and visit people. You don't go out and party. You don't go and visit grandma and grandpa in the nursing home or your parents in the nursing home. You engage in self-quarantine, right? But since you are already infectious with coronavirus before you feel any symptoms, you don't even know you're infected, right? You still feel good. You still feel motivated to go about your daily lives. And therefore, you're going out, you're traveling, you're doing everything as you normally would, and you're spreading the virus and infecting other people. And because you don't know it, you don't know that you're putting other people at risk, the people who have compromised immune systems, people who are elderly. You don't understand that you're spreading it because you don't feel it, right? This means that as widespread as influenza and as deadly as influenza is, when we already engage in that self-quarantine just as a natural response to not feeling well, think about how much more infectious, more dangerous to people, how many more people will be infected, how many more people will be hospitalized, and how many more deaths will occur because you're out and about spreading the infection, right? Does that make sense now? As I go through and explain why, it is a threat, and although influenza is a threat, this is an even bigger threat. It's just because it's going to spread out more if people don't self-quarantine because they don't know that they're sick. They don't know that they're infecting other people, and they're not, self-quarantining themselves. All right. Now, let me get to the second part of, the statement that I make when I start off talking about the coronavirus, and that is the level of threat versus the panic, right? Because you're going, well, you're saying that, it's not worth the panic of the travel ban, of the self-quarantines. No, I'm not saying that that's, not warranted, right? I'm not saying that. Those things are completely warranted because of the asymptomatic, contagiousness, right? The being contagious before you show symptoms. So all that stuff is warranted. And yes, it's going to go through and create a lot of hardships. It's going to take us a little bit of time to recover. So thank God Trump is in charge of the response and eliminating a lot of the bureaucracy. What I'm talking about, between the threat and the level of panic is everyone going out buying up all the toilet paper, everyone going out buying up all the hand sanitizer, everyone going through and clearing all the shelves of food. Okay, so people going out and panic buying, right? Leaving other people without basic essentials of toilet paper, hand sanitizers, and basic hygiene. Things that are needed for basic hygiene. Plus, going out and panic buying so much food, right? To the point where you're buying so much that the food is likely to rot and spoil before you can even get around to eating it. And as you do that, you're leaving other people critically short of food. If you were to go out there, based off of the quarantine guidelines and the expert guidelines, and let's say, a typical household, and I'm only assuming this is typical for how my family does grocery shopping, but we tend to go grocery shopping once every 2 weeks. We buy 2 weeks worth of food. Well, if you take a look at, 14, 15-day, quarantine guidelines, for the nation, there's no reason for you to be buying up 30 days worth of food, 45 days worth of food, or 2 months worth of food. If you were to go out and, just say, okay, I'm going to buy, as normal, a 2-week, supply of food, I know I'll eat it. It won't go to waste. It won't deprive other people of food, right? And therefore, you're not creating additional panic, strain, and causing other people to increase their panic level. That's what I'm talking about the risk versus the panic, is all the panic buying. If you really feel panicked, maybe you could think about, 2.5 weeks worth of food, right? You don't need to go beyond that, right? So it's that type of panic that I'm talking about when I'm talking about the level of threat versus the actual panic, because for the majority of you, those of you who are healthy and, young or middle age, even if you do get sick, it's not a death sentence for you. As long as you don't have a compromised immune system, you're going to be pretty much okay. So you don't need to go out and do all that panic buying, and so it's that, type of panic that I'm talking about, the risk versus the panic. I hope this goes through and provides you some clarification here as to, that it's no contradiction that I'm talking about the Republicans having been, ahead of this, Trump having been ahead of this the whole time, and, the risk versus the panic. All right. So maybe I should have defined that a little bit sooner. I thought I was being clear. Apparently, there are some people that were slightly confused. Okay, so going on here, Trump, giving daily press briefings, has been really good and announcing all the actions that the government has been taking under his leadership to deal with this crisis. So let's take a look at, just a couple of them.
Last night, the FDA announced groundbreaking new policies to further increase testing, very substantially so. All states can now authorize tests developed and used within their borders in addition to the FDA. So the states are very much involved. They have been involved from the beginning, but we're stepping it up as much as we can, and the testing procedures are going well. And within a short period of time, all of the private labs will kick in. This has never been done before. Today, we're also announcing a dramatic expansion of our Medicare telehealth services. Medicare patients can now visit any doctor by phone or video conference at no additional cost, including with commonly used services like FaceTime and Skype. A historic breakthrough. This has not been done before either. In addition, states have the authority to cover telehealth services for their medical patients.
Okay, so Trump is continuing to get rid of the bureaucracy, the red tape, a lot of regulations that are hindering the response to the coronavirus in order to be able to more efficiently, be able to respond to the crisis. And because of America ingenuity, in which we have led the way in technological and medical advancements, even with the, economy and businesses doing a lot of closing and people staying home, is because of all the technological advances led by America that we have been able to, use that technology to, sort of minimize the disruption, with a lot of people working from home. Now, there's some hilarious pictures about, people having to make makeshift workspaces, using, their liquor cabinet, or ironing boards, because most people don't have a home office or, a desk. So we were kind of, in large part unprepared, for the work from home as far as creating the workspace, although we have the computers and everything. And, with telehealth, being able to go through, being able to have a doctor visit, consult with a doctor without having to risk going outside and catching an infection if you're not, or, providing, extra safety to a lot of doctors to minimize how many doctors would be, quarantine as a result of being exposed to the coronavirus. The president going through, and cutting out a lot of regulations and a lot of red tapes in order to allow more of those services, especially to those who are most vulnerable, senior citizens on Medicare. That is, really tremendous. I mean, he's going through and has been showing tremendous leadership and being able to, use this crisis to, further accelerate the advancement and modernization of the federal government, and doing so in record time. It is great. And, as he's going out and doing this, we're starting to see a split, on the Democrats, right? And in the media, where some of them, who have, been all politics all the time, are starting to get their heads out of their asses and starting to get away and stop, being all politics all the time, and actually going through and trying to be a little more responsible. Now, I don't want to give the media too much credit here, because there has been signs in the past where the media, looked like they were going to get their head out of their politics and do some real journalism, only for, about the next day for them to go back to it. So, a little bit of word of caution there before I go through and give them a little bit of praise. With that said, there is a split where, even on the same network, different hosts, some of them, getting their head out of their politics and actually starting to get serious in their reporting here, while others, are kind of giving mix, where they're sort of praising Trump, but at the same time, they're attacking him with underhanded comments during the praise, and other hosts that have continued to keep their head up their politics. They just can't get their head removed from their ass. So I do want to take a little bit of time here to note, on this, because this was a complete shocker to a lot of people in politics.
I mean, look, this is just coming back to where this conversation started after the press conference. I hear what Sanjay is saying about Tony Fauci giving, a little bit more wiggle room than others. But if you look at the big picture, this was remarkable from the President of the United States. This is a nonpartisan. This is an important thing to note and to applaud from an American standpoint, from a human standpoint. He is being the kind of leader that people need, at least in tone today and yesterday, in tone that people need and want and yearn for in times of crisis and uncertainty.
Okay, so we've spent the past few episodes ripping on the media about their disgusting reporting and how they've politicized this. So I think it's only fair that when the media, or at least somebody in the media, starts doing the right thing and stops with the, politics of hate and division, and starts going off and saying, hey, let's put politics aside. We're dealing with an actual, crisis in the country, and we need to pull together if we're going to get through it, that, we should highlight that as well. So, that now, whether or not that's going to continue is unknown, and that isn't, every anchor on CNN or all guests on CNN. That was just this particular segment. But we're also seeing that even during the election cycle, some Democrats, in positions of governorship, who are normally, attack Trump, be for against everything Trump recommends and for everything Trump doesn't like, and constantly attacking Trump for any disagreements and political policy, are even during an election year are starting to put their politics aside and starting to put the safety concern of their people ahead of politics and ahead of election year politics. So here is another big shocker that came out.
I can tell you the actions he has taken evidence that his team has been on it. I know a team when they're on it, and I know a team when they're not on it. His team is on it. They've been responsive late at night, early in the morning, and they've thus far been doing everything that they can do, and I want to say thank you, and I want to say that I appreciate it, and they will have nothing but cooperation and partnership from the state of New York. And we're not Democrats and we're not Republicans. We are Americans at the end of the day. That's who we are. And that's who we are when we are at our best. So this hypersensitivity about politics and reading every comment and wanting to pit one against the other, there's no time for this.
And that is exactly right. So I never thought I would actually, give credit to the New York governor. I never thought I would do that. But in this particular case, he is finally able to go through and put politics aside for the benefit of the nation. I just wish that these were not, small, or isolated, instances, that this would become more widespread among the media and those in elected office to get the politics out of this and to focus on the crisis and ways that we can go through and get the crisis, because there are more problems that are going to be coming our way, or could potentially be coming our way. And we're going to have to be able to pull together, and we're going to have to rally around smart policies as we do so. I mean, Trump has gone out for the, since he started campaigning, back in 2016, talking about the America First agenda. And as he was saying that, he was talking about bringing manufacturing back to the United States. He has talked about it from an economic standpoint, and he's talked about it from a national security standpoint. Well, we are now seeing that, all of this offshoring, globalization, and locating factories in foreign countries can have a negative effect during times of crisis. And this whole bring all the manufacturing back into the United States, where some people were attacking that, saying that's isolationism and all of that. Well, news broke recently that states, hey, actually, we probably should have been listening to all of that.
China, rather than trying to calm fears now, is ratcheting up threats. This recent article came out in China's state-run newspaper. It's called Xinhua. It's basically the mouthpiece for the Communist Party. It claimed China might impose pharmaceutical export controls that'd plunge America into, quote, the mighty sea of the coronavirus. It's important to note, Ed, this isn't really a hypothetical threat. The FDA has already announced a drug shortage related to the coronavirus. They haven't publicly said which drug this is, perhaps to quell fears and, incite some kind of a panic here.
Right.
But there are already drugs that are in short supply, one that is dangerously in short supply.
Yes. So, as you know, this outbreak, it started in China. We, have, scientists telling us that, came from bats. And we know that in China, they were putting, partially, cooked bats in soups and eating it. Well, China has not liked the fact that so much has been highlighted about how the outbreak started there, the cause of the outbreak, and how China tried to hide the outbreak from the rest of the world, delaying our ability, to respond, right? So China has gone out and tried flexing its muscles. First, with the World Health Organization, trying to go off and, silence any criticization of China's response, trying to shift the blame, throwing out conspiracy theories, trying to get, the, international organizations to levy some criticism towards the United States. But now, because we have persisted to continue to highlight how this happened, how this pandemic, ended up, from its origins to the United States, China is now going off and saying, hey, you know what? You better stop criticizing us. You better stop letting everybody know what happened. Otherwise, we're going to cut off the medications because, all your pharmaceutical companies, where do you think their production is located? Where do you think their mass production is located after they got everything, created and developed? Well, thank you for paying our people to create your products, that you created, but now, we can just confiscate it, if we don't like your response. And this is a national security threat. This is why it was important to keep, critical manufacturing in the United States, why it's critical to bring back, manufacturing into the United States for things that we need so that other countries can't hold us hostage to their whims, or to try and censor and block out any information or news that they don't particularly like because they don't find it flattering, to call them out for what they do, right? And so, we see this coming along as well as everything else. And, this is why some in the media are starting to finally come around and get their head out of their politics. However, not all are, some of them are, maybe being dragged, kicking and screaming to acknowledge, the president, his action and leadership. But as they do so, they can't help but to try and throw in some snide remark or underhanded comment to try and insult because they are still, keeping an eye on election and politics and optics. So they don't want to give too much credit for the president for taking quick and decisive action and how he has led one of the most effective responses that we have seen in modern time. For instance, let's take a look at MSNBC.
After 3-4 weeks of the White House being in denial, talking about this going away magically, I think that's the realization that finally landed hard on the White House yesterday, that there's not going to be a happy ending to this. You're trying to mitigate. You're trying to manage this and keep the death count as low as possible. What we saw yesterday was a White House finally focused on what they need to be focused on. I'm curious what your thoughts are about moving forward. Do we need from the White House to have a declaration that the entire country's locked down like they're doing in France and Spain? Or is this a good first step? Is this a good trial balloon to get people prepared? Because we've gone from emergency declaration to now the president of the White House saying 10 or fewer people together, work at home, self-isolate in a dramatic way. Are we just going step by step to the point where the country gets locked down like France and Spain?
Well, I think, first of all, I agree with John that we have to be careful about a Lucy in the football situation here. One press conference where the president meets kind of the minimum requirements of sobriety and clarity is not a sea change.
Okay, they just couldn't help themselves. First, they tried to rewrite the narrative as if Trump wasn't the one taking this seriously. They have to get that dig and slam in at the end, while in the middle, they go through and they try to, begrudgingly admit, that Trump's response and leadership has been good during this process. but they couldn't help but to try and, dig and spin and, rewrite the history, because remember, it was Trump all the way back in January trying to warn us about what was going on with China and implementing travel bans. The media and, the Democrats were focused on trying to impeach him based off of the hoax regarding Ukraine, and, then started calling his actions bigoted, racist, and xenophobic. But now, as everything, has gotten real, the Democrats are trying to shift the narrative, because as we know, the Democrats always try to accuse the Republicans for the failed actions of the Democrats, and then try to take credit for the successes and leadership of the Republicans. This is nothing new. And it's sad that during a crisis such as this, that, any praise, that they actually admit to has to be, surrounded by, these little digs and rewriting history. And I mean, there was a great, timeline that has come out, where you can see, as, debunking the left's narrative that they were the ones, sounding the alarm and Trump was ignoring it, where it goes through and shows Trump, making statements, all the way back in January, and the Democrats attacking him. Trump, making additional statements, throughout February, and the media attacks him. It wasn't until, the past couple of weeks that the media suddenly, and the Democrats suddenly went, oh crap, we really actually have a problem here in the United States. It's actually reached our shores. We got to rewrite history. And, so it is that interesting play as they try to, find ways to attack Trump while begrudgingly having to admit, the successes he has as a leader. Unfortunately, there are some, that can't even, manage a begrudging, admission of Trump's leadership. And so the Washington Post, real sick, real disgusting. These are people, that are garbage. Anybody who subscribes to the Washington Post should cancel their subscription. I mean, this is just unbelievably sick.
Washington Post piece that talks about the fact that older Americans are more worried about coronavirus unless they're Republican, Jennifer. Yeah. That we now have a situation where Trump's own people are actually in greater danger, but those of us who live in this earth can't even reach them. They're not listening to anything that any of us say, including someone like you who's a former Republican. You can't reach them.
No, and there is a particular cruelty, irony, that it is their core viewers, the Republican older viewers, as Eric said, who are the most at risk. And when you think about it, which party immediately canceled all of their rallies? Which party immediately started having their political figures really portray and use their lives as an example? It was the Democrats. So they're going to be, I hate to put it in these terms, there are going to be less Democrat deaths because of there will be less mass gatherings. There will be less opportunities for people to congregate and share this horrible disease. So it is really a very short-sighted strategy. But I think now the name of the game is how do they get back on planet Earth?
Right.
And part of the way I think they're doing it is down the memory hole. He jumped on this right away.
Right.
Don't you know? It was because of all that planning that we're doing so well, which is head spinning for the rest of us who watched him for weeks say this was a hoax. But this is how they do it at Fox News. Suddenly he's been the most preactive
It's like
president.
Russia. He's been the toughest on Russia.
He's been the toughest on them. So they will kind of contort themselves to kind of get in.
Okay, now there was so much bull crap in that, claim there. First off, the Democrats, once again, trying to rewrite history, rewrite the narrative, and trying to act like they were the ones taking everything seriously. Yet, at the same time, they were attacking any and all efforts that Trump was taking, starting back in January, to keep us safe. They kept attacking him. Now, the Democrats always going through and taking what they are doing and then projecting it upon their political opponents, all the bad things that they are doing. So when they're talking about, oh, now they're contorting themselves and going down the memory hole and all that, that's what the Democrats are doing. But, the Democrats are always accusing the Republicans of the horrible actions of the Democrats. Right? And they do this and they know they're going to get away with it. They know their viewers are, so entrenched in, the gaslighting from the last decades and, all the lies and conspiracy theories that they have pushed. Now what's going to happen is the Democrats are going to go out and go, oh, you're memory holding, you're rewriting history. And it's like, no, you did that. We actually can provide you a timeline. We can show you video after video after video of Trump going through, sounding the alarm, and then having the left attack him for it. Now, as far as who is doing, self-isolation and self-quarantine more, going out less, let's see here. Even as Trump was going off and talking about, the quarantines, stay away from gyms, and all that, Democrats were, and their political leaders were still going to the gyms. They were going out and saying, this isn't the time to be isolationist. This isn't the time to be xenophobic. Oh, yes. AOC going out there and saying, if you stop going to restaurants, especially Chinese restaurants, you're a racist. During this time, don't stay at home, get out there and go to the restaurants. I mean, we can see this. I mean, they act as though the internet doesn't exist. They act as though, people haven't, been recording all of their, Instagram and Periscopes and YouTube live streams, right? And uploaded videos. They keep forgetting this little thing called the internet, in which people can go back through and fact check them. But of course, I guess, they don't need to remember this thing called the internet, because the left never goes back and actually checks on it. No one on the left actually goes through and goes, should we check to see who really was sounding the alarm and who was, trying to downplay it and telling everybody, don't listen, go out. And it's because of this that there are a lot of people who, although they don't feel symptoms, are still going out and, spreading, more and more infections. And, it's because, of the delay of the media and, they know about the memory hole because they have practiced it many, many times. One of these days I'm going to go through and I'm going to put together a compilation of, a whole bunch of videos. Hopefully I'll have time to be able to do this, of not only this crisis, but past crises where the Republicans have sounded the alarm, the Democrats have tried downplaying it, attacking it with, their name-calling campaigns, and then going back around and, trying to rewrite history, and then, manage to go through and convince a portion of the population that their rewritten version of history is somehow the truth. They don't live in reality, and unfortunately, no matter how much reality kicks in, no matter how much people suffer, it's not going to bring them back to reality. They're completely in cuckoo land, right? And so, anyways, we are seeing this, sort of shift, in the media where there's some divide, and maybe some of that, is about getting their head out of their politics. And some of that is going, guys, everyone's actually paying, massive attention to this issue. If we keep reporting a bunch of fake news and lies, it's going to completely destroy credibility because, while people, while their core audience forgave them for all the hoaxes and fake news of the past, they forgave them because they couldn't handle having lost the election. So they were looking for anyone to tell them what they wanted to hear. But in a public health crisis, people actually want facts and information and know, what to do in order to protect them and their family. And others on the left still cannot see that. So we are seeing, this bit of a divergence. It will be interesting to see as the crisis goes on if more and more people in the media can get their head out of their politics and actually be concerned more about the public safety, and then worry about rewriting history after the pandemic. Let's concern ourselves on the issue at hand, and then you can go back later and try to rewrite history like you always do. Okay, so there are other things that are going on here that is very much concerning here. And, well, before I go through to that story, there is one other thing here that is utterly disgusting. The Daily Caller, MSNBC analysts, in their attempts to try and attack Trump, suggest using coronavirus to prosecute Trump for negligent homicide. Gets an assist from Democratic candidate. Oh, yes. Of course, they're going to go through and, as far as trying to shift the blame back on, shift the blame to Trump, and as they rewrite history, now they're already trying to go through and promote the idea that coronavirus can be used to forcibly remove Trump from office by claiming negligent homicide. Well, if we were to look at the actual course of events, if they believe that, there is a case for negligent homicide as it relates to the coronavirus, a lot of Democrats would end up being prosecuted for negligent homicide. The evidence here of being able to show that the Democrats obstructed and did everything that they could to try and obstruct the initial efforts to stop the coronavirus entry into the United States is overwhelming and would be able to be shown to any court. So if they want to go through and try and promote more conspiracy theories, they better watch out, because if any law or anything ever actually gets passed that would allow someone to be, held, as prosecutable for negligent homicide for the spread of a pandemic, or the spread of a virus originating from a foreign country into the United States, thanks for floating that idea out, Democrats. That will be something that I will be looking forward to seeing whether or not anything like that could actually pass the courts, and that would result in a lot of Democrats being rounded up and prosecuted. All right. Now, beyond that, there are some other scary things that are going on as it relates to the coronavirus. Right now, Fox News is reporting that a New Jersey woman who tested positive for coronavirus remains at large after giving the hospital false name and address. And so what had happened was, a person went to the hospital for whatever reason, we could try and speculate, gave the hospital a false name and a false address, took the coronavirus test, because it would take, a few days to get back. Maybe they didn't know that it would take a couple of days. The test came back positive for coronavirus, but because they gave a false name and a false address, they can't, track down this woman. Now they're trying to, go through and see if the hospital can find and release video footage in order to get, identification or at least a picture of this woman out, because right now we have someone who, we now know is infected with the coronavirus, is contagious with the coronavirus, and is just roaming around at large with nobody able to, figure out who the person is and how to track them down. This is a very dangerous situation when people are doing this. This is, right up there with, the coronavirus challenge of people going into public restrooms to lick the toilet seats. These are dangerous things. These are stupid things. If you're going out to get tested for coronavirus, give your real name, give your real address. Do not do stupid, dumb butt things that make you a threat and a danger to other people. All right? Are we clear about this? Take this seriously. Yes, I know the internet is full of a lot of funny memes. There's a lot of good jokes on there. There's a lot of things that have made me laugh on there. right? But while we need a little bit of humor during these times to help us get through the crisis and, try and give us some levity, so that, we can kind of calm and ease our nerves just a little bit, that shouldn't distract from the fact that this is a real threat. All right? This shouldn't distract from that. Now, there are some other things that are going on because the Democrats, never letting a crisis go to waste, have been going out and trying to use the coronavirus in order to pass, their dream list, their socialist utopia. Well, it wasn't left unnoticed to the left about Trump saying something about sending money out to Americans to get through some rough times, and so the left is now going, how coronavirus could finally turn universal basic income, long favored by Silicon Valley, into a political reality. Now, let's go through and take a look at the difference between what Trump is saying and, how the left is trying to report it. Because Trump is not saying we're going to go and implement universal basic income. Right? How the left wants to promote universal basic income is for it to be a forever program. Whereby, no matter what the economy is doing during boom times, bust times, whether, people want to work or don't want to work, they should get $1,000 a month, per person, right? And that's their whole thing behind universal basic income. When Trump is going out there and talking about maybe providing some financial relief, temporarily to American families, it's because of specifically the pandemic. And specifically because businesses are closing down. It's not that, people are still going to work and so you're still doling out money to them. No, it's because of federal policies and state and local, action that is telling businesses, no, you have to close. You're not allowed to be open. You have to limit your hours of operations. You cannot, cater to the public like you did in the past, is because of all the impact on businesses as part of our, response to the coronavirus that is now putting people in a situation where they can't go to work and get a paycheck, right? And not all businesses, especially small business owners, have the financial ability to continue to pay their workers, without an income coming in from patrons, right? And while they may have up some cash reserves, getting through the next, 2 weeks, 4 weeks with very little income coming in and still having to pay out, to the employees could cause a lot of businesses to go under. And employees going, an extended period of time without pay because they didn't engage in financially sound decisions, such as have an emergency fund. They go, well, the poor, they don't have the extra money. Well, they get a tax return. They chose how to spend, the tax returns. If you're poor, you generally get a huge tax return. You should have set aside at least a month's worth of income, for an emergency. To get through situations. I know it's been a long time since we've had, a major crisis or a problem in the United States, but how the left is wanting to go through and say this is now, now the right supports universal basic income. No, we don't. We don't support universal basic income. We don't support, creating a new program. What we are supporting is temporary relief. And the main key here is temporary relief, to try and minimize the impact from the coronavirus response, that involves closing down a lot of businesses. And, that is preventing people from being able to go to work and earn their own paycheck. So the left, always tries to spin everything and take a lot of things out of context in order to try and promote, or seem like there's support for their policies, therefore we should implement it. All right. Now, there are some other things, I don't know, whether this is supposed to be a joke or whether or not this is serious or, I really don't know how to classify this, right? It just, well, go ahead and take a look for yourself. So a sheriff in Colorado is asking criminals to halt law breaking during coronavirus crisis. Oh, I don't know what to make of this. Because by definition, criminals don't listen to the law or law enforcement officials, which is why they're called lawbreakers, why they're called criminals, and some of these people are very, depraved, criminals. So whether or not, calling for them to display their humanity during a time of national crisis, especially since due to the closure of businesses, self-quarantines, and the likes, that it leaves pretty much a lot of places, ripe for, break-ins, into businesses, stealing, when you consider that the police and medical professionals and all of that are going to be bogged down in crisis response, and so, and responding, to people's, as they become sick and need help and all of that, trying to get criminals to agree not to take advantage of the situation and to not, engage in criminal activity during the crisis. I don't know whether to take this seriously, that this was an actual serious call, or whether this is one of those, just kind of, hilarity moments, joke or satire. I mean, it is not labeled as satire. I just don't, know whether or not, there's going to be any effectiveness in asking criminals to please not break the law during a crisis when most of the places you would want to loot are going to be their most vulnerable. Okay. All right. So in any event, there are some non-coronavirus related news that is going on out there. So some information had come out here being reported by the Daily Wire. If you remember a while ago, Jussie Smollett, staged a fake hate crime against himself and then reported it. And then as things, were coming out that just weren't adding up and people were investigating, he was lying, to the police, and had Chicago incur a lot of, expenses in investigating, the fake crime. And then they were going to prosecute him and all of that. And then all of a sudden, they created some secret agreement in which, Jussie Smollett didn't have to admit guilt and face no punishment for it, and not even have to really reimburse, Chicago for the expenses incurred by his fake crime. Well, it turns out, due to, a trove of documents obtained by CWP Chicago through the Freedom of Information Act, seemed to show that the Chicago prosecutor, Kim Fox, believed the Jussie Smollett hate crime case was a distraction from a more important matter and was drawing attention away from her office's prosecution of hip-hop mogul turned accused sexual predator R. Kelly. Oh, yay. So apparently they decided to let Jussie Smollett off the hook because it was overshadowing, her prosecution of R. Kelly, taking too much media attention away from, a case in which she hopes to make a career off of. It was just too much of a distraction, to deal with. It was just too much, she wanted us to focus on her handling of another case, because it's part of the Me Too movement and she could make a better career out of it. And my question is, why can't you chew and walk gum at the same time? Why couldn't you prosecute both at the same time? I mean, I assume you handle more than one case on a regular basis. Why is it that you are deciding that if one case is overshadowing the case that you want to get more attention, then that all of a sudden means that you're going to give a free pass? Do you understand the insanity of that? How, well, this wasn't the case I wanted people to focus on, so I let the person off the hook completely so that I can redirect attention to the case that is more likely to make my career. This is the Democrats. Now, granted, this was before the crisis, so, this is just how things typically are with the Democrats. How they go through and, selectively apply laws and justice and selectively decide, oh, you're exempt from any consequences of your action because, we like you, but we don't like this person. Apply the law equally and fairly. Is that so hard for you to grasp? Is that a hard concept for you to understand? Is that too much to ask for from you? I'm not quite sure what to say on that, any further. Now, there is one last article that I did want to get to here. It was carried over from yesterday. And unfortunately, as I look at the time, I'm still not going to be able to get to it today. So, as we go through and we realize that, the coronavirus, the news about the coronavirus is only going to be, pretty much limited to, new numbers of infections and new numbers of deaths, because everything that we need to know about how to actually protect ourselves, we already know. It's just a matter of doing it. And, constantly calling out, the media for their disgusting display, their partisanship and, their, gaslighting of the country and their desperate attempt to rewrite, history. Pointing that out every day. Those are things that, are generally pointed out, about the media's gross misconduct, the media's, complete and utter lack of responsibility and journalistic ethics. That's just an everyday thing. It's just more disgusting to see it during a crisis. But going through and constantly pointing all that out on an everyday basis, well, that's going to get old really fast. So, as we go through, unless there are some major breakthroughs, regarding the coronavirus, the following episodes after this are going to have a lot less to do with the coronavirus, assuming that there's anything else going on. With the lack of sports, the cancellation, of movie productions, Hollywood elites, not really going anywhere. Basically, to find anything non-corona related, I'm going to have to scour, internet videos and see what everyone is, saying in a bunch of live streams and video posts in order to be able to keep up and figure out what's going on. And then see, because the media is not likely to report on a whole lot of that because that is not the most important things. But unless there is, major updates, I'm going to be looking for, more culture and non-coronavirus related news, right? To try and help, it so that you don't miss a whole lot of things during this crisis. Okay. So anyways, that's it for this particular episode. I'd like to thank you so much for your time and attention. I see that I am growing, on YouTube. I do see, BitChute. I greatly appreciate, those of you who are finding me there, subscribing and watching every episode. But I do got to give a big shout out to those who listen to the audio version of the show, whether that's, through iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Podcast, Stitcher, and the rest. You make up the bulk of my audience, listening and downloading each episode. And I am growing more on the platforms. I think in this particular episode, I will put a link to the YouTube channel so that you'll be able to see and, see the articles or, if you want to watch this, because now you have more time to sit in front of the TV and watch, and, don't have to be, restricted to the audio in order to get the shows on the go. So I'll give you the link to the YouTube channel in the show notes of the audio version of the show. I'd like to thank you so much for your time, attention, and tuning in, and I will be back again soon.